I spoke to Elliot yesterday, and that was a nice, funny conversation. And, just bringing up what's happening for him. And I said, well, what's happening? How's your health and stuff like that? Yeah, but it seemed okay. I said he can drop in as he felt like, but this question of perceptively, and perceptively, I mean like an Einstein discovery out of common events. And then you discover in these events another dimension of things is happening. So let's say I discover in the event something that we kind of relatively knew anyway, but you discover, as a matter of fact, that living and dying are inherently happening simultaneously. And so there's enough course in that, because any walk in the garden or any walk in the woods will tell you that living and dying is naturally happening. You could see the tree dying, you could see a tree living, you could see some, blossoming, the in-between states and so on like that. So you can see, in fact, dying is necessary to the living. And all of a sudden you're introduced to a larger picture, which is more environmental or biological, where you are not only you, but you are also this happening that's taking place. And so once you've had a kind of, anytime it sleeps in that there's a larger experience happening. And then, but it's also a larger experience and then an individual experience simultaneously taking place. So let's say while you're living and surviving as a you, you're also having an effect, a ripple effect in relationship, in situations. And some of that is dependent on your actual body. In the absence of your body, there'll be memory of it. So you discover that there's many yous happening simultaneously. And that it's moving in a grid also in relationship as it's moving along simultaneously. And it seems that much of that is not so much related to the ego's sense of self, but that if looked at in retrospect, you see that one's life is almost a creative happening. And that the person in it is always confused as to the larger picture of what's happening. And they can learn elements of it. But then you see the simultaneity of living and dying is almost looking at it from a screenwriter's perspective or a novelist's perspective or a director's perspective, where the larger picture, then you see the life working towards an experience. But from the perspective of writing it, time and space are shifted. And from the perspective of, we were just discussing cancer, from the perspective of cancer, one reviews the life.
Yeah.
So when I say my first notice of cancer on the phone years ago, 20 years ago, then sent me back to my father with the same cancer 60 years earlier or so, when I was a kid, and it was never said or anything discussed, but it turned out to be the same. And so what it opened up, since my life has been this journey for the last 50 years, basically. Now, of course, there was a journey before that, but then there was some consciousness that came 50 years ago, actually in the failure of certain forms. And I discovered around that time that what appeared to be failure in the literal sense of the world was in fact reference point of a life of a parallel life. That the failures were somehow not really failure. but learned experiences. But that in many of the cases, whenever you had to do if you were in the army and you had to kill, we'll say, or if you were here and you had to steal, or you had to be a rat to someone, you ran into yourself. And that self was punished because it couldn't be a soldier enough, or it couldn't be this enough, but actually you ran into your human. And when you were in situations that dehumanized you, you may have had to fake it, but somehow you were not part of that.
Yeah.
So there are moments where you experience life as a journey. And that journey then enters into the fabric of your expression. And as you become aware of that, you see relationship then is more reflective of the journey than it is of the literal. So then relationships that come out of the journey are not so literal in terms of continuity. As long as the feeling of the journey is there, then the relationship exists. So the vow is actually to the feeling.
That's nice.
But in the literalization, the vow is towards the continuity, which would mean if it shifted, that the people would be suppressed and hide what was happening in order to maintain the look of a continuity. But in fact, what is happening, if it's not suppressed, is an entirely creative expression. And there's inherent honest conversation, which is not in your face honesty, but again and again has enough respect, literally, where there's a hey baby as things are changing or shifting. In that relationship, love doesn't go away because it never literally existed as an ownership or whatever. In fact, in retrospect only can we see, without the ego owning the story, can we see that there was a meeting for creatively. It was almost a creative meeting or even chemical meeting of energies meeting for a happening to take place. But then you also see in that happening, the history re-enters the story. And then when I say history, you see the history of family or before family or the systems that organize the family, and then enters into the literal story and possesses what is a creative act. So your relationship, if you're perceptively living a journey, it doesn't free you from the moral constraints in the world. It enhances them by showing you what they really mean. It doesn't mean imprisonment literally to a continuity. It means being true to a calling or to a feeling. And it seems to me that that will kind of be respected at the same time. It may not be able to, it creates a conflict. Because then your relationship is to a true feeling, even in its absence. And then what you are doing is caring for the circumstance you're in. So it almost puts you into a very weird scene where you're almost like a nun with a relationship with Jesus at the same time that you're maintaining a circumstance of looking out for people or doing this or doing, understand? Okay. And so that does resemble a Mirabai where she somehow, her yearning for Krishna was so strong that there would be times where there would be sightings of Krishna, the body. And then there was a time that I say at the end time where she evoked Krishna into the body, and the husband saw her and surrendered his ownership of the marriage. He saw her relationship was with God or with the energy or with Krishna. And it just spoke to everyone. Those who the light. Now, this is all, again, wishful thinking. because we also are regular people in the world subject to the forces that are happening. Is Urja. Well, glad we spoke about all this stuff before Urja came in.
Hi,
I knew you would say that.
You knew I would say that?
I'm kidding.
So how are you feeling with it all? I'm sorry to interrupt it, but I've been talking with Urja about how she's managing.
Well, it seems that there is up and down as far as completely enjoying being alive, and other times I feel I'm drying my feet. It's like suddenly gravity gets heavier.
But but in what terms? Do you feel ill?
Well, I can't use the term physicalism. It's like a total exhaustion, it feels like. And it's the full moon. Apparently, that's what's the boat on the canal.
All the dogs are barking here at something. Maybe it's the UPS or something.
I'll stop.
No, you don't stop. What I was saying that, well, you kind of know, say Sammy. Sammy, excuse me. Wow, something must be happening. Let me see what's going on.
Maybe it's the coyote. Hi, Urja.
Hello.
Hi, Derek.
Hello, Derek.
How's it going?
Urja, when's your birthday? Did we miss it? Did it go by? Yeah, it went by.
21st. It was 21st of this month.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday. You 80, 81.
Same age as Danny.
Yeah.
We're 3 weeks apart.
Yeah, his birthday is soon.
And you? When is yours, Kai?
Mine, July 19th.
Oh, you had your birthday already?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And
Long
that was apparently the mailman is out there.
Oh, my goodness. He came into the house?
No, he's out in the front there, and but Sammy loves that. And Sammy's the big black dog that Segway brought years ago. After he hit him for 3 weeks, and then then
Brenda.
later, so it's been with Brenda. She's been with Brenda ever since, and she's huge, beautiful black dog that barks with the coyotes, and everything else also. And then we've got
Probably
little
protects
Maggie.
the little ones from the coyotes. She
Yeah,
probably protects
well, I can't say that because it seems that the coyotes are pretty strong, aren't they? We've had dogs really slashed up by coyotes in the past. But
Yeah.
we'll see. So it's a funny atmosphere and that because it's more. She just gets up and barks and jumps up. Like she's got this huge character. You can't say, "Oh, lighten up now." So then, Urja, you say then what you're describing is a low thyroid condition, or what they call Hashimoto.
Okay.
You've researched that, I'm sure, right?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not, I was never,
Well, I mean, that's what they allude to, that somehow the immune system is having an effect on the thyroid, and it's not producing then. It's not producing enough, so there's low and high.
yes.
Now, the thyroid is very much located to the circadian rhythms. And so being indoors and seeing screens most of the day will, so you can also measure, huh?
I don't watch it with the screen during the day. I have a rule.
No, the computer.
Yes, I don't watch no.
So they say once you have the condition, then it factualizes. It's not just for a week or a month or something, but it becomes then. So then you kind of are taking measurements about your exposure to sunlight. or to natural light, and that your eye exposure, since it comes through the eyes and the eyes regulate, but now that you have a lens, they say then you may not be getting the natural light coming through because it comes through the pupils and affects the brain and blah, 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 and the body. So it's amazing togetherness. So it would be as if they were explaining something physically. They said, look, the plants can't grow because the soil doesn't have enough. You would understand. So let's say you are managing this field of your body. It's like a field where you're growing things.
Yeah.
And you see if there's not enough water, it's too dry, the plant. Okay. So basically, it seems to be something similar happening in your body around this time. So most would marvel and say, hey, she's pretty good shape for all this. If they're going to do that way. Okay.
In my building.
And when you see Urja, she does do that. Like she's doing this and does that. And so Urja can do all that. She can bend backwards. She's the most flexible like that. But at the same time, oh no.
Yeah.
When you're home alone, the neck doesn't give a crap if you do yoga, whatever you do, or whatever. Right. Because there's something real happening that is not an enemy or make it go away or anything like that. But you see the body is kind of surrendering. It's moving, it's managing, it's almost as if it's managing a business or a circumstance or whatever, how much room it needs. And it is doing it. Okay. So we do see that unless you take some measures otherwise, the body starts to surrender its hands and feet towards taking care of its more necessary organs and things like that. So it is you have to give it a kiss, the immune system, you understand, and say, thanks for looking out for me while I've been doing this or that. So pain makes us aware of it, but before the pain, there are some signals that are telling you when your system's in kind of trouble.
At this stage, yeah, there's bound to be some troubles, no?
So at this stage, you are managing it.
Yes.
And in managing it, you see, and we're discussing, and you become then a death doula. And the death doula, in case the rest of you don't understand, the death doula is someone who not only recognizes that dying is inherently integrated into living, but that from that perception then enters into the story and cares for people. Now, that's not literally laid out what that care is. If you look up death doula in your neighborhood, you'll probably see here there's about 120 people. I went to a meeting a few years ago.
It's a business.
And it became a business, but before then they had some pretty hip women. There were 4 or 6 women that gave a talk there, and there was about 100 people in the audience there. And they called on me, what do I think? And, we were discussing some of the things that came. But it was a kind of recognition, but not only when it literalizes as a medical fact, but there was a recognition that dying and living were intertwined, and they were somehow caretakers of that. Even though they had different professions, and some were doctors, and they kind of agreed between themselves about something that they hide from their patients. And so, in fact, in the thing that doctors may find or whatever, what they can let you know about they see, what the relationship to dying and living is, when they're engaged in that as a fact all the time. Yet when you meet them personally, they're also subject to the similar challenges that you would be.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that many of the questions in the story are coming out of the fact of living and dying. And if you look at the field of planting or whatever, you would also see that many of the challenges are happening because there's not enough sun, there's not enough this or that, or the water supply is gone. where there are coyotes in the area and gophers in the area. So somehow you're managing a system. And somehow it doesn't have to literalize. You can intuit in managing the garden or whatever. You could intuit a happening when it's healthy looking, when it's not healthy looking. So somehow we are so used to it as a norm. But there is a blockage to that being reflected on oneself.
Yeah.
So then you'll also find oftentimes people who treat tough conditions end up somehow with tough conditions themselves. Well, we're finding that the cancer doctor then gets the same cancer that he's been treating in some way. Now, or similar cancer, but the same name of cancer. So you see very insane threads running through the story that they're not so insane upon reflection. You see how logical they are from the logic of perception. But that they wouldn't be available to you unless you came to a critical mass yourself, just as if you came to an impasse in your music. But you knew enough to come to an impasse. So that impasse is this, or that failure feeling is a special place because you had to have a degree of talent or a dimension of depth to come to the failure.
Mm.
So we literalized the failure, but the failure, in fact, was the limit of one form. It's the reflection on that that may open a doorway or an accident happening there that shows you that the next step that you're in comes from a different place.
Yeah, I love that.
And but you also understand that it is the kind of frustration of circumstance. So they describe, I think, some of your condition. I just saw it there online of Hashimoto, and that was a natural occurrence of the thyroid juggling. And their premise would be that it moves with the outside rhythms, the rhythm of the sun. Now it's not so literal that you put the head out the window when the sun is shining or something like that. But it is that the awareness of it.
Hmm.
But you also see that you do like slow anyway.
Now, yes.
I mean, you wouldn't want to go out now and run and jog 2 miles.
No,
Why not?
because I could not do it.
You can do it.
Physically, I have done it sometime catching the bus.
Yeah.
And create
Catching
such
the buses.
I can do it, but then the pain afterward.
Okay.
Oh,
So then you see that you reveal then what is happening.
Yes.
Okay. And so that would be also, they felt quite dangerous if you then up the situation like that, then your heart may not be able to bear it. Okay.
It feels like that.
So let's say you're in a system that once it happens, then the next logical thing happens. And since you're a doula, then what do you think is happening as a doula?
It's almost perfection, the art of surrender, of acceptance. It's like it becomes it's my artistic endeavor now.
mm.
So you see then that there's a thing of beauty happening, even though it hurts in the neck. And one becomes a pain in the neck when they get a pain in the neck. So when someone starts saying, hey, you're a pain in the neck, it's because I am getting pains in my neck.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I have done enough
So
of that.
let's say at one point, a physician may see a thing of beauty happening where the systems are surrendering.
Yes.
And you're also, your projections are also surrendering. So when I'm talking about jogging or even running to the bus, that would be like all of a sudden you get dressed up and you go out and you do something. So I say, so you see then that you're bringing it in, everything. But it's still relative. If you then all of a sudden got an idea or inspiration or a boyfriend or something, they say, why don't you come out to the gym and jump up and down? You may. So then let's say there's a surrender happening by just living. But then also if there's an enthusiasm or a feeling happening, then they say, okay, take another year. Well, here's another 2 years to play with. And it doesn't have to be literal. But I do feel that when we kidded around last year or 2 years ago, and we with Jai also, they will play with a 3-year idea. And it didn't have to literally be a 3-year, but everyone felt like hanging around for at least 3 years. Depending on their situation, to write something, to meet someone, to watch a series on Netflix, all of them became creative acts. It didn't matter if they were dopey sounding or not sounding. It's that it spoke to you. But you saw that time was relative. So I think in becoming a death doula, you saw that time was relative. Now, not only to the body's capacity to juggle, but also something happens in the body when one is inspired.
Yes.
Then the body seems that, okay, I'll give you 3 years, or I'll give you 2 years. You see, it's almost a remarkable creative thing that seems really dumb, that you then examine your body and there's an agreement of a couple of years now.
This morning I started singing French song, and somehow it lifted my spirit. It felt good to sing in French.
So see that you're doing push-ups with the friend. You know, it's a kind of push-ups, and you'll see that sometimes there's enthusiasm and sometimes the hell with it, and this. So that is actually a reflection of what is happening.
Yeah.
And also the body is picking up from you what's happening for you. So you, if you're me and you, we're into it and not into it at the same time. You can see something on TV that breaks your heart.
Yes.
Again, now if you're watching that hearings where they had the foot on the guy's neck there, and
yeah.
You see, and then how the guy is trying to trick the other people whose heart were broken when they were watching it, and they were saying, "Just let him up and let him breathe." That's all. And I say, you know, just understand you're going a bit too far. It's not so much don't arrest him, do arrest him, and this and that, but understand that that you're showing off your power now. When part of your being a cop is to be fair and honest. So, and being fair or honest is the observer sees something horrible happen.
It seems there was something so
then somehow when you're engaged in the act, the observer who's calling out to you is almost like God calling out to you in one sense. They're making you aware of something because of the situation and you can't fully see. So when you kill the observer or shut them up, when the observer is saying, hey man, the guy's dying. He's not being arrested. He's dying. And I say, why? I say, because if you held your arm around, in combat, if you held your arm around the person's neck, you would understand that they had about 40 seconds before they would become unconscious. So in that wrestling, as the guy said there, in the world of wrestling or in the world of Tai Chi or something, if the guy faints because of, you have an agreement to let him go.
Right.
Because you understand it's the betwixt and between states. I've had a knee on my neck at one point years ago, and you're helpless in that feeling for some reason. What do you say, Derek? But I mean, just as an illustration, when the observer watches something that the people are so engaged in their own trip that they can't see that something inhuman is taking place. And you can't call out to them and say, okay, lighten up now. It's a bit too much.
Helpless and frustrated.
Helpless and frustrated because it's around doing when it's actually around seeing.
But seeing all around for everybody too, right? Myself included, or George Floyd included, or
Well, you see that all the series of, when you now have films of everything, you see what appear to be really weird accidents or random encounters, all of a sudden becomes a story. And yet each person in the story was going about doing their thing. It's not as if they called each other on the phone and says, let's do this thing and put a film together. So you see that somehow accidents were essential to what's happening, or what looks like accident. But if you see above it, and you see all the characters that would get engaged, you see almost had a plan. Even though it's not literally a plan, you see, and many of the people didn't know each other, and it was a first time meeting. You see all these ingredients that had to go into one simple act, a guy with a foot on his neck. And they say, how did you get to a foot on the neck? And you can go back 500 years and see how that foot on the neck is there. You can go back 50 seconds, but back is not really back in this. If you are writing the story or seeing the whole story, you see that time was not as much a factor, but that a series of things had to happen before that event took place. And even though they're all accidents to get there, you see it's almost planned. But it's not literally planned, but it's planned from the conditions of the people, what their situations are, what they have to do, who they are, from a shopkeeper to a cop to a person who's strung out and broke. And so you see that somewhere there are plans. What to do when you're in this, as if this situation is normal. So you see that everyone in the situation found it normal. From the shopkeeper to the guy counterfeit bill, to the use of drugs, to the cops, to the circumstance, to the racial tensions, to what it takes to work in a small area like that, that's tough. So you see everyone had a plan laid out and how to act laid out. The shopkeeper had a way to act. The cops had a way to act. The people who were being accused of crimes had a way to act. And we get a chance to see it from a helpless state, meaning that we can't enter into the picture at the time and say, hey, this is what's happening. Say you get to see it before it goes down. And you say, hey, you guy's gonna die. I don't know if you want to go that far with it. You yell out into the story because you see the forces that are going down. Once they go down, they're gonna do their thing. And you see the cop is then proving himself to the people that are following him. He's got a couple of younger people working with him, how to contain a big guy, how to make sure that they all shut up and they listen that you are the authority. So you see everyone in the circumstance doing their thing. But then when they exceed their thing, I remember reading about, I don't know if you read about My Lai in Vietnam, where this, I don't know if he was a corporal or not, but they took over a village and then he had them kill all the families in the village in Vietnam. That was called My Lai. And one kid he started to cry and break down. There wasn't a kid, he was a soldier, but he was, I think, 17 or 18 or whatever. But he broke down, and many of them started to break down as they were being ordered to do it. And then when it came out in court, that I think there was 350 people or something like that, the My Lai incident, they call it. it kind of revealed the whole happening where they had to do it. And those who didn't do it were considered screw-ups and cowards and this and that. When they knew that they would live with that for the rest of their life somehow in memory or whatever. So let's say it's as it literalizes. But then if you've also seen militants and military forces, once it gets on a roll, it justifies itself. And if he was teaching these other younger guys that he was involved with, the cop, where they had to go along with it, let's say that the very arrogance of teaching, and they're saying, hey, it's too long and this and that, you would, So let's say, as the observer in your helplessness, you're touched by it and you see the system that you're in. And so even though you see the incident, you see the systemic logic that it's in, that gives the person to hit the 65-year-old woman in Times Square yesterday and call her names while these other people watch. That's the story of today, that she was Asian. Okay, and I say, well, I don't even know what it means. Say you wake up and you're Asian. And then all of a sudden, you're being attacked because you're Asian. You say, look, I'm just me. Look what I'm doing. Okay. So let's say that something literalizes who you are. And how did they come to such a viewpoint? And it just seems accidents. But then as you start to examine the other elements that run through the story, you see it's not only logic that runs through the story. Now, Ursula said that she saw in the paper the other day that one of the people killed in the shootout there in Boulder was a friend of hers that she knew. So somehow that shifts the picture a little bit.
Yes, it does.
Because there was still some space between you and the experience.
Right.
But then you also see a neighbor, a friend, or could be you.
Yeah.
You could have been shopping or whatever there. And there's nothing remarkable about the character that you're accusing of having done it. In fact, there seems to be a million of them walking around. A million what appear to be lonely dudes walking around.
Yeah.
So what do you say, Derek? You see that you are in a system.
I also see I play my own part in reinforcing that system.
Well, let's say there's a systemic logic that runs through it, but then an incident happens that looks like it's spontaneous. And it is spontaneous from the moment. But you see almost everyone was planning to go shopping that day, to get a gun that day, that they were having, people were planning without knowing the other's plans are happening. And that it's unusual that it's advertised as happening because 100 of them are happening every day. Shootouts or this or that, people being killed, or they say generally how many are killed throughout the year and how many commit suicide, guns in this climate or whatever. And you see then that you're stepping into a grid. Now, Janet's, as I say, her son and her 11-year-old granddaughter, they drove out here.
Oh, yeah.
And they went out to the park yesterday and camping and this and that and taking hikes. She's just thrilled.
How old is she, the girl? No.
11 years old. I'm out yesterday here, so she's just, huh? Same as Eric's girl, boy is 11 years old. And how old are your kids there?
8 and 13. Tigo will be 14 in a couple weeks.
Oh boy, he's 14 already.
I know he's getting to be very much of an individual.
Yeah. Well, he sounds it. Is he on the computer a lot or online?
It's between computer. He goes back and forth between computer and guitar.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
That's good. Yeah.
He's getting really good at guitar. It's really cool to watch.
That's great. That's really great. Is he studying with anyone?
Yeah, he goes to a music school. So he has a lot of classes plus and he's playing in a big concert in a couple weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's cool.
So he's kind of transcending the situation he's in. Meaning that he has a life with the world.
Yo, he does. Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He's finding his individuality for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Then you're okay with that?
Oh, I encourage that. Yes, as long as it doesn't seem like it's suppressing him, that would be my only concern.
Well, I'm saying Eric's kids, the girl that was just here, they're all pretty brilliant and pretty sharp.
Yeah, he had a test yesterday and he was 12th grade level in almost everything except spelling. He was a grade lower in spelling.
That's great. And he's been doing homeschooling.
Yeah, this kind of unschooling thing that we do. He really just teaches himself mostly.
That's fine. And it does seem to be okay. I mean,
Well, the test sure showed. I was shocked when he's in 8th grade and most of his test results were like end of 12th grade level.
Mathematics also? Well, I guess.
Yes, and we don't do that much math. I have started doing math with them just in case he wants to go to college. But yeah, his math was very high.
I would say if the computer is now second nature to you now, they're in a world that we're not in.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, so basically, there is something what they call normal math, where it's just even high-powered math in your everyday. In fact, there are courses in it. I may have some here of everyday math. In other words, where you see the mathematics and everything.
He's very into trigonometry and things like that he can actually use. He applies them.
Yeah, no, that's great then. But first you have to get through algebra.
Well, I've been working on algebra with him this year and he hates it. He loves the trigonometry.
Most hate it. Most hate algebra.
Algebra.
That's you have to go through.
He has to see the application. If he doesn't see the application, he doesn't like to do it.
I've been reading this a little bit, The Lost Art of Finding Our Way. But I have a couple of, there are books on, books on tape that just show you. And also from the Institute, there is the Santa Fe Institute was made by, I showed you that book before, didn't I? The
Gelman.
Huh?
Gelman. Marty
Yeah.
Gelman.
Yeah, but you know what he did, Barry Gelman?
He coined the term the quark, or discovered the quark.
But what he also saw, he was a collector of pre-Columbian artifacts. And he saw in the jaguar, because their god was in a jaguar form, their statues. And that was 1,000 years ago or more. He saw the quark discovery and the jaguar to be talking about the same thing that they were talking about 1,000 or 2,000 years ago in their religious texts, in their concepts of what was happening. They were in fact almost pure physics.
What was the quark again? I know you discussed it before, I forget.
Here, I'll show you. I think I have it here. You want to explain it there?
You know, or the literal definition. You know, they thought it was, they originally thought that everything was made of atoms and there was nothing else, empty space was in there. But then they discovered inside of all of that were all kinds of things. One of them would be the quark. I think there are 8 different like I think they're called nanoparticles, and it makes up the fabric of our reality, which is fascinating. He talks about. I was reading this other book that Danny had mentioned.
So it's the space between.
Yeah, between everything really, and it's like what's between that becomes the next question, at least in my mind. And this punk science book is talking about everything existing as a wave particle, and it doesn't come into being until the observer.
Right. Well, that's the quantum physics, right?
Right. Well, so yeah, that's what the quark is from, is a quantum angle at the thing, So
basically, this is the book.
That was good, Derek. Thank you.
That's the book there. It probably would be a good gift to him.
Tigo. Oh, yeah. Maybe he doesn't like to read that.
But here's, it's probably online, but if you connect with that institute, they have courses there that are immersives, and it's free.
What's
free
it called
here
again?
Anyway. So it's a Santa Fe Institute.
That's the Complexity Explorer? Is that one?
I wanted to show you what a jaguar looked like. A person who was a jaguar, becoming a jaguar.
Mm.
Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
So this came out of the Brooklyn Museum.
Beautiful.
It was donated there, but it's a person, in other words, they're so still that they have balance being a human being and a jaguar simultaneously, or the experience of being a jaguar. And so, but the book, The Quark and the Jaguar, I have a painting. When I went to when he passed away, they had a home sale of stuff there. So I went up there and I found a painting of the jaguar looking through the bushes. But the bushes was really a drawing of circles that could explain the quark. Now here's a female jaguar figure.
Mm.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's,
what are these dated to, Danny?
this one here would probably be around Mescal. I think it would be almost 2,000 years old.
No.
And it's made of
But he saw, in other words, there was an idea that when you became a jaguar in your consciousness, but it was stillness.
Yeah.
That you were in that. And so he discovered in collecting this a language. And you also read quite a few others where they saw a language being communicated. In other words, that there were some people in the past, like a Socrates or whatever, that the scientists still love because they were speaking a pure language about something. And so let's see if he comes up with something like that. But that may not be bad if you can get that, or we can send you one.
Yeah, that's
Quark
great.
and the Jaguar, and the adventures in the simple and the complex at the same time. Now, this lost art of finding our way is more something that I've done in the past, which is that dead reckoning.
Dead reckoning, you said?
Dead reckoning, where you can look at something, just like you can stick your hand out the window and see if it's cold or not, or you can figure out by looking at the clouds if it's going to rain soon or whatever. There's a form of dead reckoning that is natural, that is taken for granted. But if you explain how a person can kind of feel that it's going to rain in a few hours or something like that, how you were able to measure all these 100 things and kind of predict your sense. And you also understand if you were in farming or in taking care of land, you would even have a deeper sense of the situation you were in and the weather and so on like that. So let's say if you were in fields that would monitor the shifting events, you would kind of be aware of things that most people aren't literally aware of, but take for granted. So in that, once you see all of those fields, it becomes natural to you. So then the living and dying of nature is not a flaw in nature. It is, in fact, an organic premise. and you see if it's exaggerated, that something else is happening, so that somehow your eye has a balance. So it is engaged in mathematics anyway.
Yes.
But it's the intuitive mathematics that may not lend itself to the formulaic mathematics that are explaining it. But if you have the experience, essentially, of the mathematics in the story, then as you learn the language of mathematics, it does add another dimension to it. But if you don't go into it with that, then it's a job to learn. So mathematics are extremely challenging to learn, any form, unless you're somehow intuitively into it and you get it quickly.
I remember being very into it, and I'm remembering it as I'm teaching him.
Yeah, I remember being into it too as a kid, but I got kicked out of, I screwed up in algebra. So that must have been the ninth grade then? No, the 10th grade. It was the 10th grade. I left school, I think, at 15 or so. But anyway, I wore my collar up in the class or something. I was trying to attract this girl there. And the teacher kind of made a fool of me.
Oh.
And made me stand outside. First I had to stand in the room and then stand outside.
For wearing your collar?
Yeah. And I really loved algebra at the time. That was my algebra teacher, and I left the class, and I just didn't go back into the classroom. So, and what I did go to was I went to a New School of Social Research instead, which is you had to pay $45 for the course. So I left my first year of high. Well, it's the second year actually, because junior high is the 9th grade. So when you go to high school, you enter 1 year into it. The 10th grade, 10th grade is what? There's freshman, junior, must be junior. Yeah. So that set off in motion other things, but I really did like algebra, but I didn't then follow through with that in that way. But we did in other places. When I was in the Navy, then I went to electronics school there for radar and air control.
So did you apply it? Did you find yourself applying it? That would be a good thing to tell Tico. You applied it in that.
You mean applying it literally?
Yes, when you were in the Navy.
When I was in the Navy, you had to figure out distance and shape, but that's where I also learned dead reckoning, which was so that's why I said the lost art of finding a way was that once there's an intuitive math.
Yeah.
Not only where you can see what the distance of something is or the temperature of something is, or all of those are forms. You see, now if you were dedicated as a doctor, the temperature of something would be relatively important. If you were, we'll say, a ship at sea, you were using all kinds of, there were just early electronics. So you're using the math, and the math was something where a signal bumped off, a signal, there they go again. A signal bumped up. Well, that's what's probably happening to them. They pick up a smell. She must pick up a smell and a sound, but they say more of a smell for her. And she may be able to smell for a few miles. Because I find in sound, she's not that attracted, but a smell seems to be, and they say also that as I've been exploring the smell sense again, that you may be able to smell, if not better than a dog, and pick up things like that. So I've been doing an exercise outside with these clubs exercise, but I've also been doing an eye smelling, hearing movement simultaneously out there. I see the birds coming and landing in the trees, and then a hawk flying overhead, and then there's a smell. So I'm kind of, and letting the eyes be loose as I'm doing this movement that resemble Feldenkrais movements, but I'm using clubs, I'll take a picture of it because I'm doing it against the sun on the wall, so there's shadows moving.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That would be great.
So I'm kind of creating an exercise which is just natural, but it's also an exercise of the three senses in the situation there. So I'm finding that to be applying that is the mathematics. And you also see in the philosophy of exploration, you see mathematics runs through the story. But we're close to Los Alamos here, where they made the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
So then we knew a lot of these physicists here. Michael, we do have a lot of friends. His daughter probably is graduated from. A lot of the kids have grown up. The kids of physicists are pretty brilliant now in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see how he does with it. But if it's math is captured, but algebra probably has to learn.
Algebra's hard.
Well, he's talking about Stanford, so I think he probably needs to know all of that.
Stanford is good school. Good idea. Have him take a look at the Quark book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he ran Los Alamos, Murray Gell-Mann.
Oh,
That's where Michael Mattis, who I don't know if you were here when he came here. Michael Mattis was a physicist there.
yeah. Didn't he was he the one with the son that was in probably high school age?
He had a son and a daughter, and they would visit here, and we traded photographs. He was a big collector of photography. In fact, he just contributed to a museum in New York, Metropolitan Museum there. But I think that he had a huge collection of photographs. And so, in fact, I had a collection of Diane Arbor's photographs. That probably would be worth quite a few $1 million now. But at that time, he asked to sell it for me, and he sold it in New York, the whole collection of 10 of them. But he was a fun collector of photography. But he was an astrophysicist working on Los Alamos here. And I think his wife started at IBM. She went, when they left here, she then managed IBM or something. She was in the early computer years. So she was pretty brilliant also. I mean, so they thought that way. And when I met the father, he was also a physicist.
Oh.
Early on, but but in meeting them, they're just regular people hanging out.
Right.
But in the world that they were in, they just automatically thought from a different space.
Mm.
What do you say, Derek? But I think that one book that may interest him is The Punk Science.
Oh, okay.
That's not bad. That's a bit hipper. Let me see. A work of great synthesis and originality that places consciousness in the center and puts the soul back into science. That's author and director of the Scientific and Medical Network.
That might be nice. I'm trying to get him to read.
It says, wow, punk science is an extraordinary journey from the microcosm of the atom to the macrocosm of the universe and all stops in between. Manja Samantha Lawton's synthesis of cosmology and consciousness is sheer genius. It is elegant, simple, and an added bonus makes great reading. Synthesis of science and religion with a message that, okay, I don't see if that's agreeable. But it's a new model of the universe where consciousness generates life. It is the universe of coexistence and balance between regions of matter and antimatter rather than one of violent destruction and annihilation. Much as recent quantum physics has found parallels in Eastern thought, Dr. Samantha Lawton has found inspiration for this theory of everything. And so it was pretty interesting. She provides along the way explanations for many of the puzzles that still baffle scientists today. So there were a few nice moments in it, if I look through it. but it goes a bit further, but it says inside the mind of God.
Right.
So seeing mathematics as a God energy.
What's the other book called?
The other book is The Quark and the Jaguar.
Okay, I'm just writing them down.
And then the other one that I've been looking through is The Lost Art of Finding Our Way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different approach.
How old is the book?
This one is relatively new, The Lost Art of Finding Our Way, but it's let's see. It's hard to find the first page. Well, it's just good to have intuitive information, like you sent the code breaker. So I've got 100 books here. This book Ka is not bad to have because he explains ancient India, in a flowing way. And so we've have quite a few that kind of were practicing a kind of mathematics in their circumstance. So if he has an intuitive sense of it, that should be great. Stanford is if you can get into Stanford.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I figure we might as well start preparing now. It's got 4 years.
Yeah. How did he come to Stanford? I had a talk in Stanford once.
Well, California and engineering, and I don't know, that's what he came up with, Stanford. So.
Well, Spiro's partner, Erica, her family lives there in Palo Alto.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the Grateful Dead. Now, I think that she is, I don't know exactly what she does. I know she was working with young women who were in trouble years ago. So she does have a sense of, and when Urja was fainting that time, she was one who went in immediately and jumped in and started to take over the circumstance. And in fact, I think she's gone back there to take care of her family who lives back in Palo Alto. And maybe her grandfather wasn't feeling well, so she went back there to take care of them. But I'll mention that to Spiro about Stanford or whatever. Just
Right.
Who knows how things overlap.
Exactly.
There's about, as I say, about 100 kids. And you remember Sasha. Did you remember Sasha, Sasha Smith? That was his mom.
Sasha and I used to hang out in LA, yeah.
Yeah, so it was Sasha then who's married, and she got breast cancer and then had a double mastectomy to ensure that she could have a child. And then there was a whole group, and then she had the premature child before she didn't want to take, they wanted to give her meds. She didn't want to take them with the cancer. It came back. So then she had the child prematurely, and it was only 1.5 pounds. But now it must be 5 years old. But then she passed away. And that's what Sandy was saying, that she then took care of her grandchild while this was happening. And she had to kind of govern if it was too much for him, going into the hospital and seeing his mom. But she was very strong-minded. She was determined to have the child. And she did everything in order to do that and went through the cancers. And then there was quite a group, I think. But then Sandy had to witness it. And then Sasha, then that was his marriage. And he's got a sweetheart of a son with him now.
Is Sasha okay? Is he doing okay?
Well, I think that I just asked, I guess he's with other artists and other musicians or whatever. So she said that he's okay. but we'll see what that means. He's thrown by it,
Yeah.
and sure, it must have been extremely heavy duty for the normal situation to be like that. But then it was actually Sandy that was kind of managing, I think, because the strength of the mother was intense. She came then, her mother came, grandmother came, and so they were determined. She was strong. When she came here, I gave her a few, what they call, I showed you the other day, milagros, where you rub on them, and they're like holy milagros. And then there are drawings. There was one of the, I gave her one of the Madonna helping some people who were stuck in purgatory. Their heads were sticking out there, and so she liked that. She had a kind. I think that she then went to see seers, who are kind of just plain like that. But she passed away, and the child was born. And it was only 1.5 pounds, and then I remembered that. Boy, oh boy, 1.5 pounds. But then Sasha sent a picture of the boys with his hand on his head, and the boy had such a beautiful face. So somehow it was an amazing experience. It seemed that her one devotion was to having a child, nothing else.
Yeah.
And that it was something that she had planned with her mother from the beginning. So it was intense. They were intense about it. And apparently there was a group of people then who came together because they had the double mastectomy.
Oh.
Remember that period of time where the double mastectomy was necessary, so you wanted to make sure that you had the child and so on like that, and so you had to make sure that even if the other breast wasn't cancerous, you made sure by eliminating the breast entirely.
But then you can't nurse. Then you're eliminating your ability to nurse.
Yeah. So then they had a group of women who went through that, who then were advised to have the double mastectomy because it would stop you from having a child. And they were fierce about having a child. So she had it. She did it, and she lived out her life. And so Sasha, I'll find out more from. We'll see if Sandy comes back on again, calls again with Reed. But she mentioned that the boy was just with her for a few weeks there and just went back. So apparently she does take care of them, So there is math happening in the life, whether we see it or not, just like dying is happening in the life, whether we see it or not. Now, the perception of it changes your relationship to it. What do you say, Derek?
About math? The perception of it?
The perception of it. Let's say what's been happening for you. When we talked the other day about John and you coming out of John. In fact, everyone that was online at the time, we all influenced by John. Where I met you there at John's place or something, where you came in there, you played in Ojai. And then Urja also in Woodstock. I didn't meet her through everybody else we knew in Woodstock, and we were there. But John, who was more of an outsider in that situation.
And that was unbeknownst to me, really. I thought it didn't feel like he was an outsider when we went there. So I guess I didn't see that.
No, I'm not an outsider. I'm saying outsider, there was different forms. So the people who went to India and came back through Woodstock, there was a community that developed. But when I was introduced to John, it was someone said that he needed help or someone, and he was was having relationship trouble or a challenge like that. So he didn't integrate into this other picture. And even when we went out to San Francisco, there was a large community out there that no matter how much I've tried to trick all of you into meeting, you couldn't do it. You understand?
I've met a handful, I would say, but
Well,
even still, he seems to have a nice grip on the community, his community, you know.
Who's that?
John.
Yeah, so John had a separate scene going on there. Then all of us hanging, then John would come into it. But he was a pretty tough dude to integrate into a larger picture. You know, he did his thing. So he would run into you would run into the person's literalness, you know, their space and everybody. At the same time, they all shared in the energy, and all of them made a life around it to some degree.
And there's still a human thread running through it too, right? So there's still a human.
Of course, for me, it was all a theater that we've created, where everyone then took a bit of the circumstance. They all were so strong that they did themselves.
Yeah.
But the yearning for partnership was always in there. The meaning that it wasn't the yearning for partnership, it was that they had a date with a broken heart. So the relationship with John was around the broken heart. So the idea of making it cool and mellow and this and that was unlikely because the ingredients were there for the broken heart. And it was almost like a pizza. You know, you could see all the pieces necessary. And I say, why? I say, because the teaching of finding your voice has a romantic element or affectionate element into it that brings a closeness automatically. So when the closeness is there automatically, it assumes to be natural. But there it's also made, from my perspective, when we're together, the relationships are made in the energy, not in the literalness of the people. So there is a care for something, meaning that the other person has to be kind of clear in the relationship with you. Okay, whenever you, because the affection allows an instant connection between people.
You had mentioned the expectation of continuity once before, and that was almost like an allegory to the broken heart.
No. If I enter into the story, that means that there will be a moment when everyone involved, including myself, will see something, have to see something. And I'll see it when people are, even though no one's a slouch in the story, everyone's pretty heavy duty. So you've seen those heavy duty moments when it's explosive and they can't even say why it's explosive.
Not out loud, really.
Well, it's because it's not only a psychological construct. You see, so then we'll say when I mentioned the other day the green card circumstance for you as it literalizes, when in fact it was an act towards a creative act.
And you had brought up King Lear, and I guess my thought response to that was more like I felt like it was more like Ralph Cramden meets King Lear, you know.
I brought up King Lear. I didn't remember that.
And so if King Lear were played by Ralph Cramden, I thought would maybe be a pretty close.
Ralph Cramden?
Yeah, from The Honeymooners.
Boy, oh boy, that's going back 100 years ago, isn't it? No, I'm saying it's a creative theater. You know that by now, okay?
Yeah.
And if it, and it in fact requires almost as if people were actors and they have a normal situation between themselves where it normalizes. But let's say under pressure, there was a kind of inherent devotion that ran through the story. And I don't mean only that kind of devotion like that, but that does resemble a kind of devotion where the premise of disciple didn't mean follower, it meant someone. It was the beginning of the word discipline. Discipline meant love of learning. So disciple meant someone who came with an energy to discover. In fact, they said the disciple created the teacher by their intensity and forced the teacher then find dimensions within themselves in response. So there's a learning process going down. There's no literalization of the learning. If anyone is learning, then everyone's learning in their own way. They've taken a bit of the experience with them. So the premise of inquiry and exploration and discovery is that what you hear, you may even see something in the news and then see something that equates to that. And you see the sequence of seeing something. And then you see the sequence of discovery. You discover something. And then you see a situation unfolds that has that discovery in it. So the premise is that you created an immersion where everyone, so you try to have everyone be in a similar space while they were still themselves, but there was, like everyone was in the pot of soup, where there were carrots or celery or whatever they were in the soup, that somehow, even though they were literally different, there was a happening in the soup. That everyone that was affected by the soup that they were in somehow were changed. But they were doing themselves, so by doing themselves, they will run into something. And so what everyone then had to run into was that the love was not a possessive. And that the teaching of the sound, locating the sound, was not a possessive, that people were free to go where it takes them. But you see to some degree that those who got it deeply created a life out of it. But their own versions, everyone is doing their own version. So there may be a fight over the versions that people are doing. But that somehow everyone who came into the interaction about finding their voice created a life somehow around voice or music or that consciousness. So for me, it wasn't around finding your voice, it was around consciousness. So as I entered into this story, I had the similar challenge with Elliot and John that I had with everyone else, but you assumed the role of his students. But when it was introduced to a larger picture between us, then that was only an aspect of it. So then there was something for John to see also in the equation.
There's a bigger soup.
No, everyone had, it's a bigger, and Elliot also, because then as there is an intimacy, then you're also talking about the mystery with the person. Your relationship is around the mystery. So for me, I have no other relationship with the folks except the mystery. Then there's a history. So I say that the mystery is experience in absence and memory and an incident happening and an accident. But as I just said, as if you were flying over the head of the death of this guy, you would see how almost like it was planned. But it wasn't a plan like literally a plan, but it seemed to be almost a movie plan of 100 different events coinciding into a happening. And yet it was unknown to everybody involved that there was a plan out there and that they were in it. So it's not to fear it, or you see that there's fears of having such an experience happening to you. But I'm not talking about that. The awareness that when you step out into the circumstance, you step into a grid. And so you run into systems. The attraction to you is that that may be there is that you're not captured by the systemic logic. So then the attraction to John is that you can locate a sound, or you can have a different kind of life where it doesn't have to be job oriented or literally oriented or this or that. And even relationship is coming out of the attraction as if you were in a movie together. So if in fact you fall in love, if you were in a movie together, and it comes out of the movie consciousness, it's not literally a thing. At the same time it is, simultaneously. You see, once you have that creative thread runs through you, you bring that creative thread to the situation you're in. So you're true to the original feeling. But then you see that almost all of life is missing a hey baby conversation. Hey baby meaning that you don't see a difference between yourself and the other. But that you cannot be a liar in the circumstance. That somehow it has to be an agreement that we're doing this or we're doing that. And I don't know if that it's literally an agreement on paper or this or that. It may be a wink or hello or a hug or okay, let's give it a shot. Whatever form speaks to you. But the premise that between us, you're bringing a creative milieu into the everyday means that there's a kind of morality that exists in the creative world. That's not exactly spelled out. Mm-hmm. So I say the punk science may be okay for a young man to read, but it's I wouldn't believe it too much, but there's bits of information that have some value in it. And also the Lost Art was pretty good because it's dead reckoning. You meant usually you put your thumb out at sea and you see where the wind is blowing. You know, the other ones, I think if you looked online at the Santa Fe Institute for Murray Gell-Mann, but I was going to take a few courses that they're offering for free here on YouTube, I think. And it's, again, Santa Fe Institute. And they were offering a kind of the immersives around mathematics. And I think the young woman who was teaching was brilliant. And so that's what they were doing. They were creating a kind of, what I went to as a kid when I went to New School, when I quit high school, and I went to the New School for Social Research on 12th Street, I think. And it was a brilliant school, you know, and it didn't have the logic things. It just had courses that were, and I remember I took the creative writing course there. And so we would go into the park in Greenwich Village there, and I would have class in the park every day. You know? So it was like that, you know, it was pretty hip, but it was also profound. What they were teaching was profound, but it was just as friends, you know, in the park hanging out and so on. I guess that school is still there, the New School. And then I found out my father taught at Cooper Union and the Art Students League early on. I found a picture of him with all these other teachers from there, you know, so I didn't know that.
I taught Russian and French there.
Where?
I taught first year Russian.
Where?
At the School of Social Research.
The New School?
Yes.
Yeah, that was an interesting school. Yeah, so I went there when I was 15. You know, so I found my way, but I loved mathematics, but then I got kicked out of class. So then I still pursued it in my own way. Probably in joining the Navy as a kid. Walking past that place, I just got a vibe to join the Navy as a kid. You know, and then they sent me to Virginia to that learn. It was before electronics. It was figuring out sonar, radar, but one of the tricky things was bringing in a plane onto the ship, where the ship is traveling 30 miles an hour, 30 knots an hour, and the plane is traveling maybe 300 miles an hour coming in, and you have to catch it. And the guy can't see, the pilot can't see, so he's dependent on you bringing him in.
Right.
So you're using a radar thing to bring him in. But one of the problems that they learned was that if you could fly upside down and not know it, because the sky and the sea, ocean, you can't see anything out there. It's all black.
Oh my God.
And so there was something you had to learn about the medulla oblongata and balance and so on. But bringing the person in required mathematics and care and help and so on.
You did that, Danny?
Yeah, when we were I really liked that part, except when I ran into the war aspect of it. You know, they had nuclear bombs on there and all that, but you saw the plans for it. It was deeply destructive. But the first phases of it were pretty brilliant. But you were in a dark room for most of the day. You would have to get up at midnight to 4.
Oh, wow.
To watch. You had to then figure, in other words, in the middle of the night, you were in a tower up above with binoculars, and you had to measure. If a plane went down, you had to find the pilots in the dark. I remember one May Day.
Wow.
I had a fight with all these Southern guys from Mississippi because I had seen there was a plane that went down on a May Day, and we were looking. So there's about 40 ships surrounding your ship. My ship was the size of the Empire State Building. There was 5,000 people on it, 4,000 or 5,000 people. So then I saw a flare break in the sky that no one else saw, and I reported it to the captain, Mayday, and everything stopped. Are you sure you saw it, son? I said, I'm sure, sir. But then the other Southern guy said, he didn't see it. We didn't see it. And they started making a thing that I was making up a story that I saw a flare because the ship stopped. All the other ships stopped. Must have cost a few $1 million for that operation in the middle of the ocean at nighttime.
Did you find them?
We didn't find them, no.
Did somebody actually go down?
The plane went down and there was two pilots lost, but we didn't find them at that May Day.
Wow.
Time, you know. So then that brought a kind of a fight with these Southern guys. There was a group of about 8 guys from Mississippi area, you know, and
were they younger or older than you?
Also some of the officers in charge, and I was pretty friendly with the chief, who was a black guy, but he was such a sweetheart of a guy. But they all hated him because he was a black guy, but I liked him a lot. And he was the chief petty officer. So then you ran into the politics of a circumstance.
Yeah.
And so it's like the stuff, what's happening now, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I'll show you the book that I have of pictures and stuff like that. It was a very interesting time. So I enjoyed it. I have to say that I was able to go out there and do this and do that. But then again, I would run into the same kind of, in my own life, where you then had to create your own existence, create your own life. You know?
Your secret life.
Well, the question that it needed to be a secret life. Do you have a secret life, Urja?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, with the life I've had and everything that nobody knows about, yes, I do have a secret life, I guess.
Well, we'll say a hidden life, but it doesn't mean that.
Okay.
You have to hide it? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say in those terms, everyone would have a secret life.
Yes.
And once it's revealed, it doesn't sound so nice. from a literal perspective.
Yes.
What do you say? You have a secret life, Derek?
I mean, nothing that I'm holding or keeping secret. It may be just unknown to people if they just didn't know me, that, you know, but
Okay.
an open book.
How would you describe being married?
There were great moments and terrible moments, you know, challenging moments, and, you know, make it through kind of moments, and ending kind of moments. It's just sort of everything, it seemed, in
But
that.
it seemed like in the beginning it was in relationship to John, and
Yeah, they almost engineered.
basically it was around getting a green card. And so then,
but it turned into a, you know, what felt like a real, quote unquote, real situation, you know.
well, okay, so when I came here from India with Jenny, who was from New Zealand, and we drove cross country pretty broke. And then once we got to Hawaii, look at this dream that we're living. Then she has to go back to New Zealand. The visa runs out. And I was still, so then we decided, and then I called doctor also in India, and we decided to say, what should we do? Should we get married so she can get a green card? So I meet Derek 100 years earlier, before there's a Derek. And so we did this in our circumstance, helped get a green card or helped out or whatever, a relationship. So, but it wasn't so easy for me. I had to leave Hawaii with Jenny, and we then had to go to Reno, Nevada, in Las Vegas, because that was the only place that allowed you to get a divorce. I was still married from 100 years ago. We never got bothered to get divorced. So then we had to spend a few months in Nevada, living in Nevada, Reno, Nevada. And I had relatives in Las Vegas also there too, but let's say we lived there. And I had to get a divorce, and then we got married the same day in the picture, but the marriage came out of the sadhana. And like you, the green card was the premise, but of course there was a feeling that ran through the story where the green card was an aspect of it. But Jenny didn't want to go back to New Zealand. And when I suggested, doctor, should I go to New Zealand? He says, what are we going to do in New Zealand? It's like 1,000 light years away at the time. You know. So then we went through what seemed natural, but yet was so weird. But that we were free to leave Hawaii. We were free to connect in San Francisco, pick up a car there and drive to Reno. We were free then to live for that period of time. And still being broke. Always broke, but not poor. That somehow your life was really creative. It resembled more of a movie than a literal life. So when I walk into a situation with you and John and everyone in the story, I see a movie. Everyone thinks it's a literal reality. But I know how he got the apartment. I know it used to be my apartment, our apartment. You understand? So it's purely creative act, but it seems logical that he's a citizen of San Francisco. But I see the movie. And then I see everything that comes out of the movie. And the movie is more of a reality than a literal dimension. So out of that circumstance, I met Elliot in a different situation and that world that he's in. But then another world that we then saw, as I mentioned with Elliot, is that when we went, he had called and said, would we have a retreat with his dad, who was a psychiatrist out of Harvard, and the first Jewish man or something to be a psychiatrist out of Harvard or something. He was famous for that. But he was his father was a psychiatrist, and Elliot wanted to have a little retreat before he passed away when he was old. He took him to see Amaji, the hugging woman, the hugging saint there.
Mm.
And so but then there was a woman who lived with us named Claire, who was then back there in Queens, where they lived, and she became very close to the father after we left. I probably saw him off until he died. And probably shared some conversations that were impossible for any of the family members to have had. It was just a natural Claire coming out of our. When I first met Claire, she had the Billie Holiday flower on her hair.
Mm.
And she sang a song to me on the piano in a club that she had in Woodstock. Then she came out to she actually and her family invited us to Santa Fe originally. And then she went back to Woodstock with her family. Her daughter, I think, is the one daughter had an illness that she would go off into. I forget the name of the illness, but she had to pass out cards on the plane if she went bonkers.
Tourette's syndrome? No?
Maybe it was Tourette's syndrome, yeah. In fact, they opened up the society, the Tourette Society, later on. But that there were people then, they said you had to warn people around you in a close situation that you may start just yelling out and stuff like that. But brilliant at the same time.
Are you conscious of it when you do that with Tourette's? Like, do you know you're doing it?
Well, she was, Claire had dedicated herself, and the other sister was beautiful, the opposite then, because she would also go into fits. I had to cheat her when I played bingo with her. When I played checkers with her, she said, "You cheat." I said, "I have to cheat with you. You're so intense." Because you had to reach it because she was so strong and how everybody was so stupid. She was brilliant. So I think that, and then I think her sister became a manager for some singing groups or whatever. They had some fame there. But Claire opened a place in Woodstock that sold Indian jewelry. The Indians gave her the name Brightwater. So she was a force. So when she met Elliot's father, there was an instant connection, I think, even though I think she took care of him at the end. So I was kidding around with that with Elliot. So what do you say? You see your place in all of it?
I would say that's gradually becoming clearer and clearer. It's an interesting mix of gratitude and lament, Well,
the only thing is that you're kind of making when it's a shared space and I'm in the picture, then there is an agreement to kind of look out for each other. And that's not spelled out what that means.
That seems obvious, though. Maybe it's not. Well,
usually in our life we have a trip in order to survive, in order to earn a living or whatever. But that basically there is a sense of that you're caring. It's like one of the kids, you're caring for one of the kids in our circumstance. So it's not. You bring a different sensibility to it. No trip. That's a hard one.
It historically has been.
Look at all the characters involved. Now I'm going to say to Elliot, "Hey man, no trip." I'm going to say to John, "Hey man, no trip." And I say, "Are you guys kidding?" Then I say, "What does no trip mean? Is that you don't choose the self in a certain pinch. You understand that if I'm engaged with you, a creative thing is happening." So that means that you don't have, in the teaching, you don't have a hidden motive. most of the world requires, it's a selling world. It's a business world. So people hide their money, hide their this, hide their intention. So if you see the ads online or something, you see they're trying to sell you every step of the way. So one aspect of the situation you're in had a business element to it. And so the business element, once it starts to take structure, it usually prevails. And even if you go to the doctor, they're kind of suggesting you take the most expensive test or this or that. You see that they're working with their insurance companies, they're working with this or that. So generally, if you were a friend to them, you say, do I really have to go through that whole test? Why can't you just give me some perspective? Or they would look to save you from the complexity of it. If in fact you were a child of yours, that you wouldn't try to overcharge them or something. So somehow, it's that automatic feeling that you like to be in the picture of looking out for something. It's usually abstract. So then I say that basically you and Joan are somehow engaged in the circumstance of the theater, so it's coming from that place. But then you also see where an incident was an obstacle. And that incident, that obstacle is reflective of a real thing. It's not some crazy thing that just can be washed over. You see that there are real differences between people. So once that incident happens, it usually affects the creative circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're subject to forces that we don't know why and what's happening. And I say, well, once you agree that we were getting married in the sadhana, in the journey, and it wasn't so literally a marriage that way, but it was a picture of a deeper sense that included literal marriage. But it was the deeper sense that connected it.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was a consciousness that there was a creative act of people who looked out for each other. And so you see that much of it is, in fact, a creative act, that it was based on a feeling. But you see the social fabric literalizes the feeling into a fact. And so then the survival of the circumstance starts to predominate. And usually the survival in the social fabric is dependent on a job and circumstance like that. It's extremely challenging in a creative life to keep a literal life together. And as you come from a creative life into the literal, there may be times when it's not yours to bargain off the creative life, that somehow it may be who you are. So you could see as the creative life becomes literal around survival, you could start to see challenges that will automatically come in the picture because it was given a life by the feeling. Now its life is continuity. And so then you see as it loses the feeling into the continuity, there are resentments that come in and attractions and looking out, and you say, somehow the situation you're in doesn't live in repression so easily. And yet you see around you, that's the normal act in order to keep things together. There's a suppression of your dreams, there's a repression of your desires, which makes you a sneak at one point over something that was fairly normal. The desire to love, the desire to truly be creatively in that is not contradictory to the form that you're in. In fact, it created the form that you're in. So let's say you enter into a creative act as a life, and you see that there are different systems around you, and one is the workaday life, one is the creative life, one is to create a flux, flow of this, so you're in it. But again, you're not of the ambition, the cutthroat ambition that usually exists out there. So you can see what it means literally to you're in it, but not of it. I'm not of it if I have to kill somebody. In fact, I may not be of it if I have to compete on a level that's vulgar. I may say, like the Samaritan jerk, let the other guy take the shot, I'll catch it later or something. And I say, because if I'm going to do it, I don't want it coming to me that way. I want it to come in a goofier way than that, you know what I mean? And because I don't have a pro or con in it, but I'm not so much part of the systems. And I do feel that the strongest sense is this goofy thing with Ursha that we have 3 years to play with.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lived a life already. So to some extent, we're looking at it from the window out into the street. We're not actually engaged in what's happening in the street. We have a space between ourselves and the happening. And you can see sometimes when the body is also doing that the body then is tending to the life that it's living. It's not an active principle so much. What do you say, Ursha?
I agree.
Maybe I'll take some pictures of this exercise in the morning, if we can do that, if Mary can do that while the shadow on the wall. It's pretty beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still doing, what exercises are you doing, Ursha?
I do some yoga. I have a landing where I am in the sun and it's protected. So I do some yoga and I do some gyrokinesis.
Yeah.
And sometimes I dance if I hear maybe a tune or whatever. I start dancing crazily.
Yeah. So just as you go along then.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Are you doing any exercises, Kai?
Yes, I do yoga and walk and do some other just kind of YouTube. I've been doing squats lately.
Yeah.
But my body's really changing with this becoming 50 thing, and my muscles just aren't keeping up. It's interesting.
That's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph year. 50.
And I've had a dizziness all week, so I haven't done anything all week.
I'm always reminding myself to go back to that, that gyrotonic. I don't know if you can see it across the room there. You see it back there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll go on it. Can you see this?
Kind of.
Can you see these movements?
Yeah.
Other moves that you can make with this, but what I've been looking is extended motions. And then you can have this kind of behind you. But it's not a bad machine if you can get one. It's called the gyrotonic. Now, some of them are in wood. Ursha's daughter teaches some of that. Then I use the club, and then I use the vibration machine still. And a few other things, but I haven't taken that much of a walk. Yesterday, when I went out with Mary, I walked out in Sam's Club. I would just walk in the parking lot for a half hour while she went shopping. But I'm making it up as I go along also, but the clubs I'm doing, and then that vibration machine I do every day, generally. Okay, this has been a weird conversation. Has folks been on also? Have any other folks been on?
Yes, we've had up to 10. There are 3 now. We had Henry, Britz, Magic Sufi, Regina, and others. Yeah. So we had,
That book, Calm, may be nice to have around. He's pretty brilliant.
Do you think it's easy to get?
Yeah, it's a paperback.
Oh, it's a paperback.
who's that one by, Danny?
Uh-huh.
Who's that by?
It's by, let me see, Roberto Calasso, Calasso. The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. His first book was The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. I don't know if you know Paul Cadmus, the author. But he was pretty good. Although there's a ton of them, but I think that what I did like even in the punk science and the others was a kind of sense that the scriptures and the other things had a science in them that was conversational between certain people.
Yes.
Okay. And that they were people, and somehow they kept their humanity going together. Then I saw on the interview that a bishop then admitted that he didn't admit, he came out and announced that he's gay, and that maybe 40% of the priests are probably gay, he said. You know what I mean? And that
But they're supposed to be nothing, aren't they?
Hmm?
Aren't they supposed to be not sexual at all?
Well, they're supposed to be celibate.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as that goes. But then I guess gayness at the time secretly probably was a secret form of celibacy. Because it wasn't, in other words, you didn't enter into the reproductive element.
Oh, I see.
So then there was always a pressure where lovemaking wasn't around babies, or lovemaking wasn't around continuity, but lovemaking was lovemaking. So that's what they found. That's supposedly, I would say that Ka book discovers a little bit of that. Is that it was sensuality. There was a difference in sensuality. That's why the husband of Mirabai surrendered the literal relationship towards the love affair that she had with Krishna. But it was sensuality, not sexuality. In fact, sexuality, they said, was in the way of sensuality. So supposedly, when you saw those drawings of them, they were engaged in sensuality, not sexuality so much. That coming from devotion, it was a different thing. The commitment was to the feeling.
I love that.
And the commitment was to the purity of the thing.
Yeah.
And it was no longer pure, and it literalized. And so from the perspective of being in it, the purity was the reason, not the survival. The purity of pure affection, where the other and yourself were one.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the social fabric of the literalization of it, then they say took away from the creative element of it. And that there are many lives being lived in a human being. But that when one discovers a creative thread running through their life, meaning not owned by the ego, or the self, or the identity, but one coming more out of the creativity or the feeling. And then it assumes identity. But it's subject to the literalization of the social fabric of your measurement is an identity that's continuing. And then when you meet a being that's remarkably, comes, even though they try to literalize their past and what happened and this and that, you see it came out of more of a creative act. That's what I mean by discovering parents and discovering this, that because you discover what everyone else could see, and that there was a parallel life going on. You discover the mathematics of your own life. So that discovery then brings you into the story from a different place, where your survival is also based on your capacity to love and be creative. It is not just earning a living or having money or identity that way. So when the world is not only dominated by a survival gene, but in other words, you fall in love and then you figure out a way of how to keep it together. That keeping it together is a creative act. As long as the feeling is there, you'll find ways. But when the feeling falls away and the continuity dominates, then it becomes increasingly difficult to do what it would have been an agreement. And it should be.
Yeah.
It's, in other words, it's not some fluke thing that's happening. When it becomes increasingly difficult to continue, it's because it is increasingly difficult to continue. It's missing that the agreement. It's missing the hey baby conversation. Do you want to try some things? Maybe we can give you. So it's coming from a different place. You want to still hang around a bit longer, Urja, or you want to give up the ghost? Did you look at that series, Getting On?
I couldn't. I have an iPad.
Yeah.
I can
It's very weird. But
TV, but I can't buy anything on
there was a series, one in England and then here, and it was called Getting On. And we watched it at one point, and it was about a bunch of people in the hospital, working in the hospital.
Funny. It was funny.
It was funny, but it's funny, but people are dying, the women are dying, they're complaining.
Oh.
So it is around people who are dying in the war that they're in and the conversations they're having.
It's very funny too.
Hmm?
I remember it being very funny sometimes. Very.
It was weirdly funny because they're also having boyfriends, the nurses and the doctors, and they're bringing them in. And so it was just a goofy show. It was called Getting On. But the American version is even funnier than the English version to some degree. But it was very, like angry old ladies yelling at they want to smoke, continue smoking. And yet they were just treating dying as the normalcy of a situation, okay. And they had to see how many people died every day and argue with them, and they wanted more money, and this was going on. And so it was just a very funny thing. But I don't know, is it on other stations, or what do you think there, Derek? Getting On. There's an English one and there's an American one.
Let me see if I can find it.
I thought it was Getting It On, but it's
Getting On and these. Getting On was the English name. Getting It On is a different thing. It doesn't mean dying.
Looks like it's on Hulu.
Yeah, it's on Hulu.
Oh, it's on Hulu, yeah.
Is it on HBO Max?
Looks like it's on HBO Max. It looks like it's on Amazon Prime too.
Oh, yes?
Mm-hmm.
The American version? That's good. It's worth goofing with, just seeing a couple of episodes about what they go through.
Okay.
Okay, I hope this was all understandable, but there's a premise of a creative milieu that we've put together, and then we're discussing things from a creative perspective. So the reason I used an illustration as if we're making a film or writing something together is that we kind of then bring a creative moment to the moment, and our literal life is put aside for a moment. And so therefore, then when you're discussing things, we're discussing things from the creative perspective. How does one keep a creative life together in a literal everyday circumstance?
Yeah.
And you see then when we're discussing, we're creating that milieu. It's not so much a how-to, it's being in the space. that you discover that the life is creative. It is not something that I am creative and it's literal. It's you see at the same time that they laid a literal trip on the stories that we watched, we were able to see the beginnings and how it happened and how it was almost all put together, and yet it seemed like a series of accidents.
Yeah.
But you see that there's an experience somehow waiting for you in life. And it's not only the experience of your projection, but you see that somehow the creative elements that you put together have an experience waiting for you in time, where the thing that you did will manifest in a different way. So then I say, when I introduced that I got married, we had to get, for the green card, we had to go through an impossible circumstance to go to, because America at that time, you couldn't get divorced easily, except in Nevada, because everywhere else you had to prove that the person was bad or this or that. So in Nevada, you were able to just, but you had to become a resident of it. But we did all this around the South and around that it was normal for us to do. And you see how remarkable that event was, how much of a movie it was, what took place, and then what comes out of that. And the children that come out of that creative expression have an element of creativity in them also. And so you see that everyone who shared had an immersive of normalcy around what was really a creative act. So our normalcy is more of a movie than a literal structure. So each of these books have a little line or a little seeing or something, not so much a belief system, but just kind of allow you to see perspective. And to also allow you to see, without dumbing it down, the creative circumstance you're in while you're in an everyday circumstance.
Right. It's important.
And how each of us have an expression in it. So those I can't see, thanks for dropping by. I hope it makes some sense. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Danny. As always.
Take care. I'll see you tomorrow, Dad.
Great.
Okay, then. Here's your bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.